All right. Well, welcome, folks, to the April 4th Utilities and Commerce Committee. In absence of a quorum, we're going to start as a subcommittee, and I see Mr. Hill is here. So, Mr. Hill, if you're ready to present, we will start with you. Let me also make some housekeeping updates. Everybody's coming now. Mr. Gurrell and Ms. Skinner will be absent. Replacing Mr. Gurrell will be Mr. Garrick. Thank you, Mr. Garrick. And replacing Ms. Skinner will be Assemblymember Carter, and should be arriving shortly. So thank you. Sheila, when you're ready. Thank you.
19-year-old Brett Studebaker exposed popular as a place for underage drinking to occur with no supervision. Operators aggressively market their buses to young partiers with neon lighting, bars, sound systems, and room for dancing, drinking, and lounging. The problem is that party buses are not held to the same standards as limousines. This loophole is highlighted by the recent tragedies we've seen with underage drinking on party buses throughout the state. On October 9th, 2010, a 17-year-old Redondo Beach student was killed trying to walk across the Harbor Freeway during a party bus stop. The coroner's officials determined his blood alcohol level was more than 3 times the legal limit. On February 5th, 2010, Brett Studebaker spent hours drinking on a party bus for his friend's birthday. At 2 a.m., the party bus operator dropped off passengers at their cars, and Brett attempted to drive home. He died about 30 minutes later when his car crashed into a sound wall and another vehicle on Highway 101 near San Mateo. His blood alcohol level was more than 3 times the legal limit. All we're asking for with this bill is that party bus operators be held to the same standard as limousine operators when underage drinking occurs in their vehicles. AB 45 will require drivers to read a statement to underage passengers that the consumption of alcohol is unlawful and obtain a signature to that effect. If during the course of the ride anyone under 21 is found to be or to have been consuming alcohol, the contract will be terminated and the driver will be required to drop off the individual at the pickup location. This is common sense legislation that will prevent tragedies from happening. We met with members of the Livery Association about a month ago, and they raised an issue and a concern, and we took an amendment to that effect to correct that, and they are now in support. Recently, actually last Thursday, we met with the Bus Association, and they have a concern, and I frankly agree with their concern and the issues that they raised, and we will work out a solution to that concern that will, I believe, that they will be acceptable.
Hill, will you just hold for a minute, and we're going to establish a quorum.
Very good.
Move forward.
Fair, thank you.
Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Bradford.
Here.
Fletcher. Buchanan. Here. Fong. Fuentes. Here. Furutani. Garrick. Present. Hernandez. Here. Huffman. Knight. Here. Ma. Nastandi. Carter. Swanson. Present. Valadeo.
Here.
All right, a quorum has been established. Mr. Hill, you can continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned, we met with the Bus Association last Thursday. They raised some issues. I believe the issues are legitimate, and we have agreed to work with them to come to a solution that I believe that will work. So I will continue to work with them as the bill moves forward, if that's agreeable to the committee, and their issue is related to the applicability of the disclosure statement and how that would work. I'm joined today by Brett Studebaker's parents, Doug and Linda Studebaker, as well as another constituent, Eric Bergen, whose daughter who recently experienced underage drinking on a party bus. Mr. Chair and members, I ask for your aye vote in this.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Before we have the testimony from the parents, I just want to know if any questions from the members at this point. All right. Mr. Studebaker.
Well, I thank you for having us here today. Linda and I, we're here to deliver this message. Party buses, or as we've come to refer to them, booze cruises, they're deadly for our kids. By lending our son's name to AB 45 and speaking out, we want to accomplish three things: create awareness, save lives, and to prevent heartbreak to other families. Our son Brett was kind, thoughtful, fun-loving, a typical 19-year-old. Quiet but not shy, he was a talented musician, a freshman in college studying sound arts. He was one of the fortunate few among us that had found what his calling was and had the presence of mind to do it, to go after it. A year ago on February 6th, Brett's life ended tragically in an auto crash not far from our home in Burlingame. Minutes before the accident, 30 minutes, Brett was dropped off by a party bus after he and other kids had drank heavily on the bus for many hours, though under 21. Brett was very seriously inebriated. When he was left to fend for himself, he was an accident that was going to happen. During the past year since the tragedy, we've learned a lot about the industry and many of the companies involved. Like us, we found that most other hands-on parents really lacked knowledge of the growing party bus phenomenon. We didn't know, for instance, that party buses look on the outside just like the one that picks you up at the airport to take you to your rental car, but on the inside it's a different story. Plush interiors, extensive sound systems, dance floors, 2 or 3 bars on these excursions. That the industry is so rapidly growing in urban areas, and as such, the companies involved show much varying management style differences, some with excellent quality and safety practices, others very poor, very poor. Having owned a small business for years, we're sensitive to the need to not create unnecessary red tape for our businesses in this state. And appropriate legislation is not a substitution for responsible parenting or the decision-making of our youth. But we can't have unscrupulous operators operating at odds. That said, Assemblyperson Jerry Hill has done the right thing in introducing AB 45. The Brett Studebaker law will bring a simple, logical accountability to this party bus industry that mirrors what has successfully been in place for the limousine industry for years. Further, and this is vitally important, it brings a sensible accountability to this rapidly growing party bus industry that restaurants, bars, limousines, virtually any other business in this state must be held accountable for, and that's namely to take our underage drinking laws at face value, to take them seriously. This is why the Brett Studebaker legislation, we feel, has earned the full support of the California Livery Association, the trade group that represents the limousines and the party buses. In closing, we believe this proposed law that bears our son's name It's a fitting tribute to Brett, who was widely known for his compassion, sensitivity, and concern for others. Our hearts go out to other families, and it's our prayer that the passage of the law will bring some peace of mind to those families and to save lives going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Our story ends with a happy ending. My daughter lived. She's 16 years old. we were able to celebrate her 16th birthday and not plan a funeral that night. December 17th, my daughter attended a birthday party on a party bus for 15 and 16-year-olds. My wife and I must have been a complete naive to not know what happens on these buses. 10 p.m. at night, we get a call that something is wrong with my daughter and to please meet the bus in Millbrae. We live in San Carlos. We got there. My daughter and I and my wife, we got to the bus. My daughter was taken off the bus with foam coming out of her mouth and semi-conscious. The 21-year-old chaperone was on the bus and in charge of 15 and 16-year-olds. My daughter was put in the car. We're on the phone with the police. The bus driver says that anything that happens behind the line is not his concern or his responsibility. I must admit that shocked me beyond shock. We got my daughter to the hospital within a matter of minutes. Luckily, it's right there. Her blood alcohol was 0.26. She weighs 100 pounds. There were 15 children that night on the bus who all were either ill or in a very bad way. We, like I say, are very fortunate. After being in the hospital for the entire night, she was on IVs. She was in the emergency room. She was released at 4 a.m. With still a blood alcohol of 0.19. And I was so surprised to find out that bus companies and bus drivers of these party buses they say there's nothing that they do about this or nothing they can do. That surprised me. So I do ask that AB 45, the Studebaker, be looked at. I don't want to lose my daughter. I don't want anybody to lose their children. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more witnesses in support?
Mr. Chair and members, Rob Grossklauser with the Greater California Livery Association, the professional association that is comprised of charter party carriers in the state of California in support. Thank you.
Of course.
I'm Edward Randolph with the California Public Utilities Commission. We support the measure. It's consistent with, or exactly, exact same rules we apply to the limousine drivers. PUC already has works in task force in Southern California looking at the party buses, and this would give us additional tools to enforce underage drinking.
Witnesses in opposition.
Mr. Chairman, members, Josh Pane on behalf of the California Bus Association. I want to first say that we're working with the Assemblyman Hill to find a reasonable solution. It seems to be that over the past few years since the law was first put in for limousine companies, that limousine companies have become party bus companies. And so our membership, over 100 bus companies in the state, don't do this type of business. The charter bus company, the traditional seated rows that you think of a charter bus, is not what these party buses are. Assemblyman Hill and his staff went online, and you can see clearly that these charter bus companies are party bus companies are actually an outgrowth of the limousine companies. And what that means is it's not the traditional charter bus. It's, as Mr. Studebaker described, a bus with seating in the perimeter, lounge seating, sometimes a bar, sometimes not. Most charter buses, most all charter buses don't have this type of seating. This was created specifically out of the limousine industry. So we think, too, that those types of vehicles and those types of buses should be regulated the same exact way as limousines are regulated. So we are in total support of that concept. The kind of the rubber meets the road when you have situations from high school, from the Cub Scouts to the Boy Scouts, going to the game, from, I think your committee analysis pointed some of these things out, all the way down to kindergartners. So there are some issues that we have to try to address in a logical fashion so that we're not reading folks this statement, but that we target in on the proper type of vehicle, which is, they call now a party bus. But it's not the traditional part of the charter industry. Our board of directors had a 3-hour meeting just focused on this, trying to figure out what's the best thing to offer to Assemblyman Hill and the committee as an alternative, some alternative language. I see your consultant did an admirable job of trying to point it out that there are some issues here. So we would like to continue to work with Assemblyman Hill and try to figure out how we can create a piece of law that is something that could really work. So I came up under opposition, but I want to tell you that respectfully, and we work hard in our industry. When 11 people died on a charter coach, it went off the road in 2008. Our industry was right there. We started cooperating with Assemblyman Jones at that time, Assemblyman Liu at that time, and Senator Leland Yee. And so we got right in and we created a piece of law that went after the unscrupulous owners of companies. In that case, it was an individual. So I want you all to know that we are sensitive. We're trying to figure out the best way to do that, and we're not quite sure whether taking the owners out of the loop, out of the as the last version of the bill did, out of direct, because when these owners are unscrupulous, as you've said, those owners should be liable. So we feel strongly that we should look closely at that. We don't know if the limousine owners are liable under existing law from that law, but we do know that unscrupulous operators have to be stopped, and we're in full support of that. And so we're in full support to try to find language, whether it's perimeter seating, whether it's this is a party bus, or whether it's looks like a party bus, describing it so that we can be clear that that's what we're going after, to try to stop another tragedy like this, as we have tried to stop the tragedy in 2008 of 11 souls dying on that bus. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I'd be happy to answer any questions for you. Thank you, Assemblyman.
Thank you. Any questions? Ms. Buchanan.
I want to thank you for bringing this forward to close this loophole, because having been on school board for 18 years, I've seen more than anyone, than we should see with our youth. But I'm just curious, what do you do now for those that are covered by the law? When we talk about this being a loophole that we're closing in an outgrowth, what do you do now when you have some of the passengers are under 21 years of age and this applies?
Yeah, we should probably have the Livery Association come up and address specifically, since the law applies to them now. But
so couldn't you do the same thing you're doing now to the party? If it's working for them, why wouldn't the same work for party buses?
Well, we think it should apply to party buses and those buses that are an outgrowth of the Limousine Association.
And I think, if I may, Mr. Chair, Mr. Panay raised a good issue, and I think he did describe the distinction between actually the vehicle as the issue. And Mr. Bergen's daughter was on a 45-passenger straight inline seated bus. It was not a party bus as the Studebakers experienced. So as much as it may be the vehicle, it's also the activity. And I think that's what we're getting at, to try and distinguish between an activity that would be create a vulnerable situation for the youth, as well as the activity that is not, whether it's a Little League team going to play baseball, a Babe Ruth team, or families getting together, and how to distinguish that. And that's what we're willing and committed to work with Mr. Panay on. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, again, Rob Grossklauser with Greater California Livery Association. In response to the question, Assemblywoman, what the current process, as we understand it, is that minors should not be going around in circles drinking alcohol at all. In the circumstances where there are minors mixed with adults that are allowed to have alcoholic beverages, it's the practice of the industry and what we believe the current law, it requires us to lock that alcohol in the trunk if there are minors. Now, granted, there is an exception if you're with your parent. If you're with your parent or your legal guardian, such as like at a wedding event or something like that, alcohol is allowed in there. But events, for example, that the question came up earlier in the week about fraternity parties and things like that. Well, our members believe that the law, and I think it's pretty clear, state that you have to lock the alcohol, and the adults that are there can have access to it after we get to the location, but they're not to be drinking going around. If I could also, Mr. Chair, respond to one comment by Mr. Pane, the current provisions in law do go towards the owners, and on a third offense, they should have their license revoked by the PUC and no longer be operating in the state of California, in all honesty. And this would provide it beyond just limousine operators to other types of vehicles, all charter party carriers.
Thank you.
I do have one follow-up question here in the bill. When it says the driver shall ascertain whether any passenger is under the age of 21 years, is that, what happens if someone doesn't have ID and lies? They look, they're 21 and they're not. I mean, how do you, what mechanism are you going to use to enforce that?
The mechanism is if anyone looks like a minor and they can't provide an ID, then we make them sign an agreement, a statement that it's in law that says if we find alcohol and you're drinking here, then the ride's over. You go home. It terminates. So sorry, you just paid us $500 for however much the ride was for a very short trip. The law doesn't prescribe sort of a TSA or airport security sort of screening, but anytime there's a minor, we need them to sign an agreement that says we're aware that we find alcohol, ride terminates.
So if it's you know that there's a minor, or you can reasonably conclude that you've got minors on the vehicle, I guess.
Yes, indeed. And I think that also the current provisions surrounding alcohol are in code statutes. For example, the driver stops at Safeway and picks up the alcohol, that they could be criminally liable for those things already.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Mr. Pane.
Mr. Chairman, members, there's also, and I think my colleague in the Livery Association pointed out, in the charter industry, these charters sometimes go 2 and 3 and 5 and 6 hours. So we have laws that a driver can only drive so many hours. So the idea of terminating a trip when you're in Los Angeles and now you're in Lake Tahoe, or you're from Sacramento and now you're at in Orange County, terminating a trip at that point creates more problems, as you could well imagine. The driver's safety and the passenger's safety of returning to the location. A limousine operation, if you're around town or somewhere nearby, that's not a problem. But there's more than just when you're traveling around with 58 people and there's a 5 or 6 hour difference of your home base. So we're trying to figure out how do we create something that's realistic and workable. I suppose in that case that I list, you could spend the night and just wait and then return the next day once the driver has had his or her time off as required by federal and state law. But it's more complicated. And as I say, we're here to try to figure out how to make it safest and to make sure that rogue operators or operators that are not responsible are put out of business somehow.
You just want a reasonable remedy. I assume you're not saying that it's okay to have alcohol on the bus.
No, in fact, half of our board of directors said, Josh, you should go tell them that there should be no alcohol on any charter party carriers. None. Right. So at least half our board of directors are willing to do that. I suppose we could talk about that as a solution. So all charter party carriers would not be allowed. Our companies and most of the other part of the board said, yeah, you know, we limit it. We put it underneath. We won't allow it, or it's an extra deposit if you want alcohol. And this isn't about teenagers. This is about adults. So we could always suggest that if the committee would like to entertain something like that. Maybe it's for a longer hearing, but I suppose that for all charter party carriers, as long as everyone's equal, alcohol could be underneath or in the trunk, I suppose. Our companies do not provide alcohol. I know limousine companies, some do, some don't. So we're trying to find a reasonable accommodation. But if everyone were the same, no alcohol, you could do it under the bus, and then when you get off, it creates a crimp, because then we get to wedding parties. People want to have a glass of champagne on the bus or in the limousine for a wedding. So we start getting into these real specific details. I appreciate your patience, Mr. Chairman. You can start seeing some of the problems that come in, but we're more than willing and open. It's not our industry that have the charter buses. It's a growth out of the limousine industry. We appreciate their willingness to come forward and do what they can do as well. So, Mr. Chairman, members.
Thank you, Mr. Bonet. Mr. Swanson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hill, for the bill, and it grows out of a very tragic circumstance. I'm encouraged by the conversation that's taking place, and I'll move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Hill, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. This bill is an outgrowth of what happened in the 1980s. I have a daughter, and during the 80s, when you'd take the limousine here, you'd go to the parties, you'd do that, and the abuses that came from that, and that's what inspired this legislation originally, and it left that loophole. And as we all know, our children are a lot smarter than we are, and they found that loophole, and I think some of the party carriers found that as well and capitalized on it. This will close that loophole, and we are committed to working with Mr. Pane to come to a solution and the issues he's raised, and I respectfully ask for your aye votes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. And I personally, just on behalf of this committee, want to extend our deepest condolences at the loss of your son, and thank you for your courage and your testimony here today. It's well received, so I know Brett is smiling down and he's happy for you to move forward with this. So we have a motion by Mr. Swanson. We have a second by Mr. Hernandez. It's a do pass with amendments to appropriations. The amendments are as follows: allow exemption for certain youth group activities or round-trip sightseeing services when accompanied by a faculty or school staff member or a parent or legal guardian, and revise the PUC code. This is a technical amendment to refer to carrier certificate or permit, since the carrier could be operating under either type of charter authority. And Mr. Hill's commitment to work with Mr. Pane's Association, Bus Association, and moving as this bill moves forward. So at that note, Mr. Swanson.
Yeah, no, I would just encourage Mr. Hill to look at, I'm actually stunned by this whole issue of underage drinking. Hopefully you will examine those questions.
Okay. So again, AB 45s do pass with amendments to appropriations. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Bradford.
Aye.
Bradford, aye. Fletcher. Fletcher, aye. Buchanan. Buchanan, aye. Fong.
Aye.
Fong, aye. Fuentes. Fuentes, aye. Furutani. Furutani, aye. Garrick. Garrick, aye. Hernandez. Hernandez, aye. Huffman. Knight. Knight, aye. Ma. Ma, aye. Nastandi. Nastandi, aye. Carter. Carter, aye. Swanson.
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye. Valadeo. Valadeo, aye. Bill's out.
Mr. Hill, that bill's out 14-0. So thank you for your
thank you, members.
Studebakers
Much
family.
appreciated.
Thank you for you guys' testimony today. Members, we have 3 bills on consent today in Utilities and Commerce: AB 1390, AB 1391, and AB 1392. If we can get a motion, we can take those all at once. It's been moved by Mr. Fletcher, seconded by Mr. Fuentes on consent. Members, do we have to call roll on that? Please, call roll.
Bradford.
Aye.
Bradford, aye. Fletcher. Fletcher, aye. Buchanan. Buchanan, aye. Fong. Fong, aye. Fuentes. Fuentes, aye. Furutani. Furutani, aye. Garrick. Garrick, aye. Hernandez. Hernandez, aye. Huffman. Knight. Knight, aye. Ma. Ma, aye. Nastandi. Nastandi, aye. Carter. Carter, aye. Swanson.
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye. Valadeo. Valadeo, aye.
Okay, consent is done. Thank you. Next, I see Mr. Gordon, AB 512. Mr. Gordon, if you're ready, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Assembly Bill 512 is an opportunity to be creative in our expansion and use of renewable self-generation programs. In 2008, Assembly Bill 2466 established a program for local governments for renewable self-generation. Last year, the Select Committee on California's Green Economy recommended that there were opportunities to expand the benefits of the program. This bill would adjust the limit to qualify for bill credits from 1 megawatt to 5 megawatts. So a local government, a school district, could, in establishing a facility not on site, get a credit from one of the investor-owned utilities.
Bill's been moved and second. Mr. Gordon, you want to continue?
I would respectfully request an aye vote.
Okay, great. Members, any questions? Witnesses in support?
Yes, hi. My name is Sam Ruark, and I'm with the County of Sonoma's Department of General Services. And I just want to say that I support this bill. We have our annual bill at the County of Sonoma is about $5 million per year. Recently, we installed a 1.4 megawatt fuel cell. This fuel cell allows us to produce clean power. However, the way our load works on the county campus, there are many times where we export that power to PG&E. However, there's not a bill that allows or makes them buy that excess power. And we are not able to apply that excess generation to other accounts as well. So a bill like this would be very advantageous to the County of Sonoma.
Thank you. Next witness.
Karen Lang on behalf of the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors in support. Thank you.
Roxanne Miller, representing the Mayor, City Council of City of San Jose, and we were one of the original sponsors of the Laird bill. Thank you.
Great, thank
Mike
you.
Dillon, representing the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, the major wastewater agencies in support. Thank you.
And Hugh Bauer on behalf of the City of Santa Rosa, also in support. Thank you.
And Vern Gunning with the Planning and Conservation League, also in support of the bill.
Cindy Hillary on behalf of Regional Council of Rural Counties and CSAC in support. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Any witnesses in opposition? Hearing, seeing none. Mr. Gordon, you can close.
I would close by just simply respectfully requesting an aye vote.
Okay. We have AB 512. We have a motion by Mr. Knight, seconded by Mr. Valadeo. It's a due pass to appropriations. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Bradford?
Aye.
Bradford, aye. Fletcher?
Aye.
Fletcher, aye. Buchanan? Buchanan, aye. Fong? Aye. Fong, aye. Fuentes? Aye. Fuentes, aye. Furutani? Aye. Furutani, aye. Garrick? Aye. Garrick, aye. Hernandez? Aye. Hernandez, aye. Huffman? Aye. Huffman, aye. Knight? Aye. Knight, aye. Ma? Aye. Ma, aye. Nastandi? Aye. Nastandi, aye. Carter? Aye. Carter, aye. Swanson?
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye. Valadeo?
Aye.
Valadeo, aye. Bill's out.
Mr. Chairman, you wear glasses?
Yeah, I need glasses. I'm sorry. That bill was seconded by Mr. Fuentes. So it's out 15-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Next, we have Mr. Bell. Is Mr. Bell here? Okay, he's on his way.
Can I add on to the prior?
Yeah, yes, we'll allow Mr. Huffman to add on to both the consent and Mr. Hill's bill.
Is that the last bill, Mr. Chairman? Just kill it.
All right, Mr. Bell. Thank you. Mr. Bell will be presenting AB 136. When you're ready, Mr. Bell, we're ready for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Been moved by Mr. Fuentes, seconded by Valadale.
You guys are in a hurry, huh?
No, go right ahead, Mr.
Let's see. What am I going to do here? I ask for an aye vote, Mr. Chairman, and I have witnesses.
Out of due respect, witnesses in support, please.
Gary Cooper, representing Dynavox Technologies, the producer of the speech-generating devices in this bill. We are not by far the only producer, but we are the largest, and there are others, and we strongly support this bill. Thank you.
Next witness.
Go ahead.
Bless Shepard, representing the California ALS Advocacy Committee. CAAC consists of the 4 ALS Association chapters in California, and as you can imagine, they are very much pleased to support AB 136. This bill will expand the California Telephone Access Program to include speech-generating devices that the speech-impaired, like ALS patients, need in order to use the telephone. ALS is a cruel and devastating diagnosis. It is a degenerative disease of the motor neurons. They are the cells that control our voluntary muscles, our ability to move, walk, speak, breathe, swallow. And ALS patients rely on speech-generating devices in order to communicate. Besides ALS, those who have had strokes that have lost the ability to speak can also benefit from AB 136, also those with autism and those with cerebral palsy. So for these reasons, I urge you guys to vote on the bill. Thanks.
Next witness.
I'm Bill Barnaby on behalf of the California Speech and Hearing Association. We support AB 136 and efforts to expand the communication access. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Barnaby has been lobbying in Sacramento for 20 years. That's the first presentation he's made since he's been a lobbyist.
Thank you, Mr. Barnaby. I'm honored to have you here.
Mr. Chairman, Gary Cooper again. Jay Globitz, who is unfortunately a victim of the tragic ALS disease, would like to say a few words, if you don't mind.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. Diseases such as Lou Gehrig's are hideous. They take away the use of hands and legs and speech by slow paralysis. I am now a quadriplegic. I was totally healthy 2 years ago. Now I have to be fed through a tube in my stomach. I have to urinate through another tube. I can't scratch when I have an itch. Someone else has to do literally everything for me. I can accept those limitations, but the inability to communicate is the worst. It makes me feel very isolated and alone. I am trapped inside a sound mind. It's a horrible feeling. Devices like my Dynavox allow me to communicate with the world. Here's how it works. For those who can use their hands, there is a touch screen. I use a camera that detects a small reflective dot on the bridge of my glasses. The camera moves the cursor wherever I move my head. Pausing on a letter or word will select it. There is also an eye-track system that makes selections by monitoring one's eye movement. It is remarkable technology. I can now talk to my wife friends and family. For example, I wrote this speech yesterday and stored it to talk to you now. I can also send and receive email, change the TV channel, surf the internet, and make telephone calls. Yes, I can make telephone calls and talk through this machine. This device is a fantastic communication tool. Why isn't this communication device eligible for California Telephone Access Program funding? I am imploring you to approve Assembly Bill 136. Your support is badly needed. So many need financial assistance to buy one to free them from isolation and loneliness. Won't you please help to make the existing CDAP money available to those in dire need? It involves no new taxes, no expenditure from the general fund. It merely gives people like me access to this telecommunication device. The need is real, and the solution so simple. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Globitz, for your testimony, and we definitely heard it, and we appreciate you being here today again. It's a moving testimony as to the need for this device, so thank you. Members, are there any questions? Hearing none, Mr. Huffman.
I want to thank Mr. Bell and his very, very compelling witnesses and ask if I could be added as a co-author.
Mr. Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As someone who participated in the telecommunications industry for over 20 years, owned several different companies, and who actually sat for 5 years on the PUC as chairman of a subcommittee that oversaw TDD installation and phone rate enforcement and several others as an industry representative. This is consistent with the intent of the Deaf and Disabled Telecommunications Program, and I would encourage all of my colleagues to vote yes. The effect on this will estimated between 200 to 400 people for the machines, because private insurance, Medi-Cal, and Medicare cover these machines otherwise, and this is a worthy expenditure of a fund that already exists and sits today with, shockingly, excess dollars, and this is something that I encourage, again, all of my colleagues to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Any other? Ms. Small.
I'd just like to be added as a co-author also.
Mr. Swanson.
Yeah, I wanted to thank Mr. Bell for carrying the bill, and that you have championed a number of similar, very powerful pieces of legislation. And please add me as a co-author. Thank you.
Mr. Buchanan.
Jim caught my nod to add as a co-author, so
Okay.
thank you very much.
I believe the entire UNC committee would be honored to be a co-author of this bill today. Thank you. Mr. Bell, I again want to thank you for your advocacy in this area, and I would respectfully allow you to close right now if there's a close.
I think this is fulfilling the Americans for Disabilities Act, and we want equal access for all, and that's a principle we all believe in, so I urge and I vote.
Thank you. Members, we have a motion for AB 136. It's a due pass to appropriations. Madam Secretary, it's a motion made by Mr. Fuentes, seconded by Ms. Buchanan. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Bradford.
Aye.
Bradford, aye. Fletcher.
Aye.
Fletcher, aye. Buchanan. Buchanan, aye. Fong.
Aye.
Fong, aye. Fuentes. Fuentes, aye. Furutani. Furutani, aye. Garrick.
Aye.
Garrick, aye. Hernandez. Hernandez, aye. Huffman. Huffman, aye. Knight. Knight, aye. Ma. Ma, aye. Nastandi. Nastandi, aye. Carter. Carter, aye. Swanson. Swanson, aye. Valadeo. Valadeo, aye. It's out.
That bill's out, Mr. Hill, 15. Mr. Bell, I'm sorry, 15-0. Members, that concludes the business of the UNC April 4th committee. We stand adjourned. Thank you.